Hello. Welcome to episode 5 of the Comprehensible podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about learning English and specifically about two different types of reading, extensive reading and intensive reading. This podcast gets its name from Stephen Krashen's comprehensible input theory. Comprehensible input theory is very similar to extensive reading. Extensive reading is the opposite of intensive reading. Extensive reading is reading books that have almost no language that you don't already know well. Intensive reading is reading books with some language that you don't know at all. This is the language that you'll learn. Both of these types of reading are important. You need to learn new language to improve, but you need to use the language that you learned already because it makes learning a language fun and helps you to remember. Of course, most of the language that you encounter has a mix of language that you know and language that you don't. But you should try to get the right mix of both extensive and intensive reading in your learning schedule. Let's look at each type of reading in turn. Extensive reading is great because it makes learning fun and makes you feel successful. It feels great to read a whole book in another language, especially if you don't need to use a dictionary. It's very motivating. It also helps you to remember and become fluent. Learning a language is like learning a musical instrument. It gets easier with practice. When you see words and grammar many times, it makes you more fluent. It also helps you to use the language more like a native speaker. You can learn when and how to use the language you know by seeing patterns in the books you read. Your brain sees these patterns without trying. Your implicit memory learns them automatically. Your implicit memory also helps you to learn a musical instrument, drive a car, or tie your shoelaces. These things were very difficult at first, but now you do them without even thinking. In his comprehensible input theory, Stephen Krashen says that you should acquire language, not learn it. You can use acquired language automatically without thinking. You don't learn your native language, you acquire it. He says you should also acquire other languages you learn. We acquire language with implicit memory. So Krashen and others say that you should read lots of material with very little new language. The Extensive Reading Foundation say that extensive reading is reading with 98% to 100% language that you already know. You should also read at 150 to 200 words a minute. They recommend reading one book like this every week. Graded readers are special books for extensive reading. They are written for language learners. They are usually classified by the number of head words. A head word is a word used once or many times in a book. So the sentence, "The cat sat on the mat and the rat sat on the cat," has 13 words, but only 7 head words. Some words and grammar are very common. These are usually the first words you learn. Then you learn more words and more grammar. So all beginners usually know very similar words. All intermediate learners also know many of the same words. So head words are a very good way to show that a book is for beginners or intermediate learners. Actually, there are many different levels of graded readers. Some graded readers are novels, some are histories, and some are biographies. There are other types too. It's good to read different types of book because they have different styles of language. In addition to learning a language, graded readers let you learn new things, improve your general knowledge, and widen your reading. Graded listening is also important, and many graded readers come with audio versions so that you can listen to them as well as read them. Look in the description for a link to a list of English graded reader publishers. Intensive reading is important because it lets you learn new vocabulary and grammar. Language course books normally use intensive reading. They often give you some reading with the new language, then they explain the language and give you practice exercises. But you can use any kind of reading material for intensive reading. There are many apps and websites to help you research the new language in them. The Extensive Reading Foundation say that intensive reading is reading with between 90 and 98% language that you already know. They call anything less than 90% reading pain because it's frustrating and demotivating. You should not try to read this. Above 98% is extensive reading, as we said. When I learn Korean, I find a graded reader that is above my level. Then I research new language using Google Translate, the built-in iOS Korean English dictionary, HiNative, and a website called How to Study Korean. The iOS dictionary is good for vocabulary. It's better than Google Translate for word meanings, and it gives you lots of example sentences. I use Google Translate to translate whole sentences and understand the grammar. Sometimes I translate a sentence and realize that I already knew the grammar, but I didn't recognize it for some reason. How to Study Korean is a fantastic Korean grammar website. For learning English, there is English Page, Perfect English Grammar, or the Grammarly website, but these are written in English. Maybe you want to look for a grammar website in your own language. HiNative is a knowledge exchange for language learners. You can post language questions and native speakers will reply with answers. It's a really nice, friendly, and helpful community, and I recommend it if you're not a member already. I also do the same thing with podcasts like this one, but in Korean. I listen to the podcast first, And if I understand it, then it's extensive reading practice. If it's difficult, then I use it for an intensive listening exercise. Then I practice the new language, listen to it again, and hopefully it's now extensive listening. I think you can listen to material that you understand less than 90% of. This is because our listening skills are usually worse than our reading skills. So language that's difficult when we listen is often easy when we read it. So often we know 90% of the language. We just need listening practice. Often our brain is learning patterns when we hear language, even if we can't understand it. You can help your brain by listening, then reading, then listening again. Okay, so to summarize and conclude, it's important to get a mix of extensive and intensive reading and listening. Extensive reading and listening is fun and motivating. Intensive reading helps you learn language and grammar rules. Material that you understand 98% of or more is extensive reading. You should also read at 150 to 200 words a minute. Material that you understand 90 to 98% of is intensive reading. Material that you understand less than 90% of is annoying and counterproductive, and you shouldn't do it. With listening practice, use material that you understand 90% of it when you read it. It seems very difficult at first, but keep trying. Use graded readers for extensive reading practice. Many companies make these books, and they often come with an audio version. You can use almost any kind of book for intensive reading. Use apps and websites for research, but remember to choose materials that you already understand 90% of or more. Lastly, Stephen Krashen says that you should use only extensive reading and listening. Traditional classroom methods focus only on intensive reading and listening. I think you should do both. Extensive input is slow and unconscious, like learning your native language. But it makes you fluent and you don't forget what you learn. Intensive input is fast and conscious, but it doesn't make you fluent and you'll forget more easily. So you should use both. In my private classes, I give students extensive input materials for homework and then do intensive input and output using these materials in class. Feel free to look at my online classes on Langu. There's a link in the description. Okay, that's all for this episode. I hope you learned something useful. If there are any topics that you would like to me to talk about, tell me in the comments. All right, signing out. Until next time, bye-bye.